Arnold Schwarzenegger pulled his car slowly into the worn asphalt parking lot of Hank's Diner, a modest establishment nestled comfortably in the heart of Springfield, Ohio. The neon sign above the diner flickered gently in shades of blue and red, casting a nostalgic glow onto the puddles left behind by a recent rainfall. The enticing aroma of sizzling burgers, freshly brewed coffee, and buttery pancakes escaped through the slightly ajar door each time it swung open, beckoning passers-by like an invitation they couldn't refuse. Earlier that morning, amid a flurry of meetings, vigorous handshakes, and endless policy discussions, Arnold had overheard enthusiastic praise from several locals about the diner's legendary homemade meatloaf and golden, hand-cut fries. Despite his exhaustion, the promise of comfort food in a place untouched by pretension was irresistible, drawing him here to unwind after a grueling day. Stepping out of his car, Arnold stretched his weary muscles and approached the diner entrance. As the small brass bell jingled cheerfully above the door, he crossed the threshold into a warm, welcoming space. Hank's Diner was intimate and cozy, bathed in the soft amber light of vintage lamps that hung low above tables, each adorned with red and white checkered cloths. Alongside the walls, a series of worn leather booths hosted the same group of regulars night after night. Near the register stood an expansive wall, decorated proudly with faded Polaroid photographs capturing countless memories. Generations of patrons and smiling staff frozen in time. Inside, the air was thick and comforting, heavy with the familiar sense of bacon grease mingling pleasantly with fresh ground coffee beans. Conversations hummed gently throughout the room, underscored by the rhythmic clinking of silverware against plates and the quiet sizzle of food being prepared in the open kitchen behind the counter. As Arnold moved further into the diner, he noticed a ripple of recognition pass through the patrons. Heads subtly turned, eyes widened slightly in surprise. At one booth, a man paused mid-bite, burger held motionless, whispering urgently to his dining companion. Nearby, a woman dressed in a plaid flannel shirt set her coffee cup down abruptly, the ceramic thudding loudly against the tabletop, her eyes following Arnold curiously. He glanced toward the hostess stationed behind the counter. Initially wearing a practiced, welcoming smile, her expression shifted in an instant when she registered Arnold's unmistakable face. A brief hesitation, almost imperceptible, was enough for him to notice. Her friendly grin tightened momentarily, lips pressing together in a thin, nervous line before she quickly recovered, offering him a more composed, if slightly guarded, smile. Arnold took a gentle breath, savoring the authentic ambiance of the diner, letting the quiet warmth of this unassuming establishment embrace him. After such a demanding day, the simple comfort of a meal in this humble diner was exactly what he needed. Arnold wasn't naive. He'd been in enough rooms to know when he wasn't welcome. But this diner? The hostess paused, tucked a stray hair behind her ear, and stepped forward, saying, "Good evening." She spoke carefully. "Are you dining in or taking out?" Arnold chuckled. "Dining in." There was another awkward pause. The hostess looked over her shoulder to the kitchen, then back at him, saying, "I need to check something real quick." There was a brief moment when she slipped out the swinging door, leaving Arnold standing alone. A few heads turned to look at him, and a man at the counter shifted in his seat, as if someone were whispering something under their breath. Muted voices sounded from behind the kitchen doors, rising and falling, too faint to be heard. Arnold rolled his shoulders back, exhaling slowly. He wasn't going to make a fuss, and he wasn't going to assume anything either. Perhaps there was a policy in place, or maybe they were understaffed. Perhaps the hostess had returned. Arnold Schwarzenegger remained silent for a moment as the words lingered between them, conveying a sense of personal significance that didn't require an explanation. The diner fell into a relative silence, with only the faint sound of the grill in the background evoking a sense of stillness. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice growing firmer. "We will not be able to serve you tonight." As the usual din died down, the hostess's expression became cold and unreadable. He glanced past her toward the kitchen window and saw two cooks standing just beyond the counter, half hidden behind a heat lamp and piled high with plates. He cleared his throat and asked, "Did I do something wrong?" This time, the hostess didn't flinch. "It's just that we'd rather not serve you tonight. No policy, no closing anytime soon." Arnold settled his hands on his hips and exhaled through his nose. He'd been in plenty of awkward situations, from political debates to interviews meant to trip him up. But being rejected from a simple roadside diner was something else entirely. Suddenly, a cough escaped Arnold's throat, and he glanced over at an elderly man sitting near the counter. The man appeared to have been a regular customer. A man in his 30s leaned back with his arms crossed as if enjoying the show. Arnold took it all in, watching as some eyes averted the moment they met, while others lingered too long, holding something sharper, something closer to contentment. His hands, worn from a lifetime of labor, shook his head more than anyone else before stabbing at his last egg. A woman sat a few booths over, her expression unreadable. Feeling the weight of the moment on his shoulders, he had options. He could walk away, shake his head, and let it go. Or he could demand an explanation, call them out, and ask if they had any idea how this would look in the morning news cycle. Alternatively, he could challenge them directly, seeing if they would stick to their decision when they realized they were refusing a U.S. senator. However, he chose not to do any of those things. Finally, he asked, with a measured voice, "Can I speak with the manager?" which caught some people off guard. Just as Arnold stood there waiting, the hostess vanished once more, this time through a different door. After a few more beats of silence, a man in his early 50s stepped out, his broad shoulders revealing his inner strength. The older man at the counter mumbled something under his breath, while someone near the window let out a short laugh, as if they couldn't believe he was actually going through with this. Thick arms crossed over a grease-stained apron, his name tag read Ray. Ray didn't ask Arnold what he wanted. She simply looked him over once and said, "I hear you have a question." Ray's unreadable stare made it clear that he wasn't here to argue or throw his weight around, but he also wasn't about to leave without understanding why Arnold wanted to know why he wouldn't serve him. Ray let out a sharp breath through his nose. Feeling unprepared, he wiped his hands on his apron and glanced at the few customers who were still watching the exchange. Some pretended not to listen, but others couldn't help but be curious. "This isn't personal," he said, shifting his weight. Arnold raised an eyebrow, suggesting that it was. Ray's jaw tightened. He rubbed the back of his neck and finally sighed. "People around here have opinions about you and what you stand for. I have a business to run, and I don't want any issues to distract from that." Arnold nodded slowly, allowing the words to sink in. Me sitting down for a meal is trouble, he thought. He didn't respond immediately, but he did look over at the counter. The old man in the work jacket had returned to chewing his eggs a little more slowly, while the younger guy, a few booths away, still had his arms crossed, as if this were the best entertainment he'd had all week. Arnold had seen something similar before, though not exactly the same. It wasn't about a single decision, but rather about the consequences, appearance, and reactions of the situation. It was about the weight of expectations and the way they can influence a person's decisions. He looked back at Ray, asking, "Are you on board with this, or is this just about maintaining peace?" Ray paused, his fingers slightly curled against his apron, and Arnold noticed an uncomfortable expression, as if Ray wasn't as confident as he seemed. Just as Ray was about to respond, the younger man in the booth burst out laughing. "Oh, come on," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't that deep. You're just not welcome here." Arnold studied him for a moment, and he appeared like the type of guy who enjoyed a good argument or was waiting for an excuse to say something. Arnold didn't bite, instead turning back to Ray and saying, "I've got no problem leaving, if that's really what you want." The words hung there, giving Ray a chance to catch his breath, reconsider, and push back against whatever pressure had brought them to this point. Meanwhile, Ray's eyes darted toward the kitchen. After a while, the conversation turned back to Arnold. "I just don't want things to get ugly," Ray said. Arnold nodded in agreement. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Arnold could have stormed out, turned around, and never looked back. He could have made a call, turned this into a headline, and let the internet do its thing. Instead, he did something no one saw coming. He took out a chair, sat down, and said, "Then let's talk." The room grew increasingly tense. Arnold composed himself, keeping his hands on the table and his head resting on his shoulders. As if he had all the time in the world, the diner was unaccustomed to this kind of confrontation. Usually, one side would storm out or shut down, but this time, things took a different turn. Ray stared at him for a long time before releasing a slow exhale. "You don't want me here," Arnold shrugged. "I understand that. What I don't get is why. So, let's talk about it, dot." The younger guy in the booth let out a low laugh, but Arnold ignored him. Meanwhile, the person across from Arnold took out the chair, but instead of sitting down, he rested his arms on the back of the chair. His apron still bore the dust of flour, the kind that had likely been there since the morning shift. "I run a business," he said, his voice filled with frustration. "Ray, I don't pick fights. I don't want headlines, but I have a community to think about." Arnold nodded in agreement, so Ray asked, "So what does this community think about me?" He seemed to be waiting for someone else to respond, as the waitress shifted uncomfortably by the counter, and the man in the work jacket kept his eyes downcast. However, his fork hadn't budged for some time. In response, Ray glanced back at the people in the room. "People here don't like politicians. They don't trust them. Some of the things you've said and stood for, it doesn't sit right with folks." Arnold leaned back slightly, understanding that. "You don't know me. Do you hesitate? Then tell me." Arnold continued, asking, "If I were just some guy walking in here, not someone you've seen on TV, would we even be having this conversation?" Arnold allowed the silence to stretch out, watching Ray's expression change, albeit only slightly. However, a small crack had appeared. Out of nowhere, a younger guy scoffed, saying, "This isn't about TV, man. It's about people knowing who you really are." Arnold turned to face him, and the guy grinned, clearly enjoying the attention he had been seeking. He said, "You're the guy who acts like he understands regular people, but you play politics like everyone else." Arnold nodded slowly, considering the response. Then he asked, "What do you think I should have done differently?" The younger man blinked, indicating that the response he hadn't anticipated. The diner fell into a profound silence as Arnold continued, "You want me gone?" Ray rubbed the back of his neck and sighed. This wasn't what he had anticipated for the evening. Arnold, who was also visibly exhausted, cracked a small smile. For the first time, the tension wasn't solely related to division. It was about something else, something closer to understanding. The diners who had previously pretended not to care were now attentively watching. As Arnold sat patiently, the younger man leaned back in his booth, seemingly ready to speak. However, he suddenly looked hesitant, as if he had just realized that Arnold wasn't arguing or defending himself. Rather, he was simply waiting. Finally, he let out a breath and asked, "You want to know what people think?" In response, the younger man shook his head and tilted his head slightly, as if he were contemplating the words. "They perceive you as speaking about working-class people, but you continue to act like any other politician, making empty promises and then exhaling through your nose. And they remember." Arnold nodded slowly. "I get it." The younger man scoffed. "That's all you're gonna say?" Arnold turned to face him. "What else do you want me to say?" The man straightened in his chair. "I don't know, dude. You're supposed to argue, defend yourself, say something." Arnold set his forearms on the table. "You already decided about me. I know what it's like to feel left out. I grew up in a community where I watched people fall behind, and I experienced that feeling myself. Sure, I went to school and accomplished things no one expected of me, but it doesn't mean I forgot. Before I walked through that door, you wanted me to get angry and fight back so you could feel justified." The guy's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Arnold kept his voice steady. Ray's expression was unreadable, but he didn't look dismissive or angry. Instead, he appeared thoughtful as he tapped his fingers against the chair. Arnold glanced around the diner and said, "You don't have to agree with me. I'm not here to change your minds, but I walked in here as a customer, not a politician, just a guy looking for a meal." There was a pause, and then the old man in the work jacket muttered something like, "Damn, it's shame a man can't even get a burger." This caused tension to crack slightly, and even Ray and a few others to laugh or shake their heads. I'll tell you what Ray finally said. "Sit down and finish this conversation. If at the end of it, I don't think you're just another guy talking a good game, maybe I'll have my waitress bring you a menu." Arnold nodded with a small smirk, pulling at the corner of his mouth. It sounded like a deal. For the first time that night, the room didn't feel divided. It felt like something else. After he looked toward the kitchen, where the cooks were still watching, he turned back to him. The atmosphere in the diner had transformed, with Ray's shoulders finally relaxing a bit. The younger man in the booth, who had been smirking the whole time, was now sitting up straight instead, as if this were some sort of performance. Even the silent customers, who had been observing from the sidelines, appeared to be less sure of themselves. Arnold leaned forward ever so slightly, and he said, "All right, voice calm. Let's finish this conversation." Ray, looking exhausted, exhaled and slumped into the chair across from him. Ray rubbed his hands together and said, "I don't know if you're the guy people think you are. I don't know if you're really looking out for folks like us, or if you just know how to talk a good game." Arnold nodded fairly enough, and Ray studied him. "What I do know is that people around here have long memories. They remember every promise made to them. Every time someone shook their hand, they would look them in the eyes and promise to do something, but then they would just walk away and never return." Arnold tapped his knuckle against the table, thinking, before saying, "I don't blame them for that." Ray shook his head and huffed out a laugh, saying, "That's the problem. Nobody ever does anything." From behind the counter, the old man in the work jacket spoke again, saying, "I worked 35 damn years in a factory." He set his coffee down with a soft thunk, and he continued, "I watched my neighbors lose their jobs, watched whole families pack up and leave. I don't know, but I can tell you one thing." The old man stared at Arnold for a long time before shrugging. "You're the only one who stuck around to listen." The waitress behind the counter shifted her gaze to Ray, and the two cooks in the kitchen exchanged looks. Political figures would show up, shake hands, tell us they understood, and then drive back to wherever they came from. Surprisingly, not even the younger guy in the booth, who had been the most vocal critic, had anything to say. Arnold allowed the silence to settle before turning back to Ray. "What's it going to be?" Ray asked, tapping his fingers on the table. He then glanced toward the kitchen and let out another exhale. Then he stood up and asked Lee to fetch him a menu. The younger guy scoffed, but he didn't dispute. Lee hesitated briefly before reaching for a laminated menu, and Arnold gratefully accepted it. "Appreciate it, Don," shook his head, half in amusement and half in disbelief. "I still don't know if I like you." Arnold smiled and flipped through the menu. "That's all right. I don't need everyone to like me." Ray let out a short laugh and turned toward the kitchen, saying, "All right, boys, fire up the grill." In an instant, the tension in the diner had faded. Not entirely, but enough for the low murmur of conversation to return. What had begun as a refusal had become something nobody would forget. To gradually restore itself, Arnold sat at the booth with his menu in one hand, but he wasn't reading it. Instead, he observed Ray, the elderly man at the counter, and the younger man in the booth, who appeared skeptical but had stopped smirking. Lee, the waitress, poured him a cup of coffee but said nothing. He nodded in gratitude, and she hesitated for half a second before whispering, "We make it strong here." Arnold took a sip, raised an eyebrow, and I could hear a few people laughing. It wasn't much, but it was something. Ray, meantime, remained by the kitchen. Arms crossed, he observed Arnold as if he were attempting to decipher his demeanor. With a sigh, he returned to his seat across from him and asked, "Since you're here, tell me something." Arnold placed the menu down on the table and tilted his head slightly. Had he ever experienced anything similar before? It wasn't just rejection. People loved you one minute and hated you the next. However, this particular instance of being told he wasn't welcome in a seemingly innocuous diner, especially with such heavy baggage. Yeah, most guys in your position would have walked out, made a fuss, called a lawyer, or made sure this place was plastered all over the news by morning. Arnold smirked and thought about it. Ray nodded slowly, as if that confirmed something he had been wondering. "You stayed." Arnold leaned back slightly, taking another sip of coffee. "Yep." Don rubbed the back of his neck and exhaled. "And I can't guarantee that I won't feel guilty about serving you tomorrow morning." Arnold grinned and said, "That's fair." The old man at the counter continued speaking, his expression betraying his hunger. "It's unfortunate that men can't enjoy burgers." Arnold turned to face him, thinking, "Well, I think that's about to change." Lee then arrived, setting a plate before him with a classic diner cheeseburger and hand-cut fries. Simple but perfect. Arnold picked up the burger, took a bite, and then with a straight face, he said, "Little dry." The diner was dead silent for half a second. I've heard that the younger man in the booth didn't say a word, but there was a noticeable change in his expression. He wasn't entirely sold, but he also wasn't dismissing Arnold outright anymore. As Arnold finished his meal, the diner began to feel like a diner again. Ray let out a genuine laugh, the first of the night. A few others joined in, and Lee shook her head. Arnold placed his burger down, wiping his hands on a napkin, and jokingly set it down. Ray shook his head while still grinning. People's opinions and doubts persisted, but for one night in a small town, a different kind of conversation took place. Perhaps that was enough, because at times when everyone is ready to shout, the power lies in listening and proving, even if only for a moment, that not everything has to be a fight. If you've made it this far, I have a question for you. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between walking away or staying? As you continue to listen, please leave your thoughts in the comments. I'm interested in hearing your opinions. If you enjoyed this tale, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. I will continue to share more stories with you. Until next time.